Always saying yes to people does not become less of a habit, the higher the stakes. The more information that you have to weigh before making a commitment, imagine it as a positive feedback loop. Those around you benefit from the less likely you are to say the simple words, "No, what if we went back in time?" You're the leader of an empire, standing in front of an expectant crowd. The pressure to make everyone happy gnaws at your core. You know the decisions you make here could either win you favor or lead to your ruin, but you can't please them all. And in your attempts to satisfy everyone, something far more destructive is happening. You start to lose yourself, your power slipping through your fingers like sand. The harder you try to cling to control through pleasing others, the more you lose their respect, and piece by piece your empire crumbles. This scenario isn't just hypothetical. It's exactly what happened to some of the most powerful rulers in history. Their stories serve as painful reminders that trying to keep everyone happy is a recipe for disaster. In this video, we'll explore 5 ancient leaders who lost everything because they couldn't say no or stand firm in their convictions. And while you may not be ruling a kingdom, their lessons have never been more relevant. Nero's rise to power was marked by his obsession with pleasing the masses. As a young ruler, he lavished Rome with grand games and gifts, pouring enormous sums into public spectacles to keep the people entertained. Imagine the lights of the arena flickering in the dusk, the roaring crowds hungry for more as the gladiators fought for their lives. Nero stood, basking in the temporary approval of the masses, while his empire's coffers slowly bled dry. But the applause of the crowd never lasts, does it? While he desperately sought the love of the people, his home life was dominated by an even greater force, his overbearing mother, Agrippina. Nero, terrified of conflict with her, allowed her to control much of his early reign. The constant tug of war between keeping his mother's favor and appeasing the masses weighed heavily on his spirit, trapping him in a prison of his own making. And here's the brutal truth. No matter how much he gave, it was never enough. By focusing on avoiding conflict and keeping others happy, Nero gradually lost control over his empire, his leadership, and ultimately, his life. The more he yielded to his mother's demands and to the desires of the people, the more he sacrificed his authority. When you think about it, how many times have you tried to bend to the will of others, only to realize they never stop asking for more? This is the slow erosion of power. Nero learned this the hard way, when his constant appeasement led to him being despised by the very people he sought to please. His Praetorian Guard, the very force tasked with protecting him, lost respect for him, and it was only a matter of time before they turned against him. When they forced him to commit suicide, it became the final act of a tragic play, where trying to be everything to everyone destroyed him. Nero's story is a sobering reminder that leaders who chase popularity often find themselves alone in the end. Now let's shift our focus to another ruler whose need to please cost him everything, King Croesus of Lydia. Known for his unimaginable wealth, Croesus believed that giving would secure him alliances and admiration from powerful neighbors. Picture the grandeur of his court, filled with dignitaries from across the ancient world, each receiving lavish gifts of gold and treasures. For a time, his generosity built bridges, but soon it became a crutch. The more Croesus gave, the more others came to expect. And eventually, those gifts weren't signs of strength, they were signs of weakness. Croesus refused to say no when foreign dignitaries visited, fearing that rejecting their demands would make him appear unfriendly or ungracious. But here's the deeper issue. He was giving away the one thing that made his empire strong, its wealth. The treasury, once overflowing, was drained little by little, all in the name of maintaining friendships. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you kept giving, hoping it would secure loyalty or approval, only to realize you were being used? Croesus's experience echoes this feeling. His kingdom, stripped of its riches, became vulnerable. When Cyrus the Great of Persia came knocking, Croesus was unprepared. His people were worn out, his resources depleted, and the allies he had bought with his gifts were nowhere to be found. Croesus had mistaken generosity for diplomacy, and it cost him his kingdom. He became a cautionary tale, a king who believed he could purchase respect, but all he did was sell his power. The harsh reality is this: the more you give away without strategy, the more you lose. Croesus learned that too late, and his story serves as a chilling reminder that generosity without boundaries is a recipe for disaster. Next up is King Ethelred the Unready, whose very name, Unready, translates to no counsel or ill-advised. Ethelred's reign was defined by one disastrous decision after another, each one made to avoid confrontation rather than face his enemies head-on. And who were those enemies? The Vikings. Instead of standing firm against their relentless invasions, Ethelred tried to buy them off with what became known as Danegeld, a massive payout designed to make the Vikings go away. But here's the problem. When you feed a wolf, it doesn't stop being hungry. At first, the Vikings took the gold and left, but soon they returned, demanding even more. Ethelred's advisors kept telling him to keep paying, to avoid conflict at all costs. The treasury was bled dry. The kingdom was drained of resources, and Ethelred became a shadow of a king, forever giving in, forever making compromises. His people began to lose faith in his leadership, realizing that their king would rather bribe their enemies than defend them. When Ethelred finally tried to stand his ground, it was too late. His kingdom, weakened by years of appeasement, fell to the invaders he had tried so hard to avoid. This is the trap of compromise. When you constantly make decisions to avoid conflict, you think you're maintaining peace, but in reality, you're eroding your strength. Ethelred's failure wasn't just in the payments he made, it was in the message he sent. His enemies saw weakness, and they exploited it until there was nothing left to take. How often do we, in our own lives, find ourselves compromising again and again, thinking it will keep the peace, only to discover we've given up too much? Ethelred's reign is a stark warning. Appeasement may bring short-term relief, but it invites long-term disaster. Finally, we come to Emperor Wang Mang, a ruler who tried to play the impossible game of pleasing everyone. His heart may have been in the right place. After all, he wanted to implement reforms to help the common people, to bring fairness to the empire. But in trying to cater to every faction, from peasants to nobles to merchants, Wang Mang ended up with enemies on all sides. His land reforms, designed to redistribute wealth to the peasants, angered the nobles. His price controls, meant to help merchants, ended up backfiring. It was a classic case of trying to do too much for too many people without a clear focus. Wang Mang's attempt to be the friend of the people only succeeded in creating chaos. The peasants felt the reforms didn't go far enough, while the nobles felt they went too far. And all the while, Wang Mang stood in the middle, trying to balance on a knife's edge. Imagine being in a position where no matter what you do, someone is disappointed, someone feels betrayed. That's where Wang Mang found himself. And in the end, it wasn't just one rebellion that brought him down. It was a wave of dissatisfaction from every corner of the empire. His failure was total, and it serves as a powerful reminder that trying to please everyone often leaves you standing alone. Across each of these stories, there are clear warning signs that all these rulers ignored, signs that are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. These include giving away too much power to others, allowing their resources to be drained, losing the respect of those who mattered most, and compromising their principles in the name of avoiding conflict. When we look at these rulers, it's easy to see the pattern of destruction that followed their people-pleasing ways. They all made the same fatal mistake. They thought that by making others happy, they would secure their own safety and stability. But in reality, they were eroding the very foundations of their power. We may not be emperors or kings, but the lessons are just as relevant. In our personal and professional lives, we often find ourselves trying to appease everyone, thinking that if we just keep giving or keep compromising, things will work out. But history tells us otherwise. The more you try to please everyone, the more you lose yourself, and ultimately, you lose the respect and power you need to succeed. In this video, we've explored ancient rulers who fell victim to the trap of people-pleasing. But here's the hard truth. In life, you can't always be liked, and trying to do so will lead to your downfall. Sometimes, standing firm and being disliked in the short term is the only way to protect your kingdom in the long run. While it's easy to see where the people-pleasers failed, history also provides us with examples of leaders who understood the importance of setting boundaries, standing firm, and maintaining their principles, even when it wasn't the popular choice. Let's start with Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king of Rome, who demonstrated that leadership doesn't come from bending to the whims of others, but from consistent self-discipline and a clear understanding of one's duties. Marcus Aurelius set strict limits for himself and for those around him. He was respected, not because he always said yes, but because he maintained unwavering personal principles and adhered to them in both public and private matters. Imagine a situation where everyone around you is screaming for more, demanding your attention, or asking for favors, and instead of being swept up in the noise, you stand firm, unbothered, and hold on to what you know is right. That was Marcus Aurelius's strength. He wasn't universally loved, but he was respected. And respect, especially in leadership, holds far more weight than temporary popularity. It's the kind of strength that builds lasting authority and power, the kind that others can't take away, even if they wanted to. Now take a Cyrus the Great of Persia. Cyrus was generous, yes, but never foolishly so. His acts of kindness were strategic, calculated to strengthen loyalty rather than to win approval. Unlike Croesus, who gave until he had nothing left, Cyrus rewarded loyalty without becoming a slave to it. He didn't hand out his kingdom's wealth in an attempt to buy love. Instead, he used it to build alliances, rewarding strength and commitment. There's a crucial difference between giving because you want people to like you and giving because you want people to respect you. The former drains you, while the latter empowers you. The lesson here is that generosity should be used strategically. Whether it's your time, your resources, or your energy, it's vital to ensure that when you give, you do so with a purpose. Otherwise, like Croesus, you'll find yourself standing on empty ground, wondering where everything went. Look at Emperor Vespasian, another ruler who demonstrated the power of firm, principled decision-making. He understood that ruling wasn't about being liked, but about doing what was necessary for the greater good, even if it meant being unpopular in the short term. Vespasian didn't shy away from making the tough calls, whether it was instituting unpopular taxes to rebuild Rome's finances, or disciplining his own son for misusing public funds. He recognized that leadership required making decisions that were right, not just decisions that were easy. Now think of those moments in your own life when you've compromised too much. Maybe you've been in a situation where you've kept giving in, hoping things would get better, but instead, you just felt smaller, less certain, and ultimately, more lost. This is what happens when you trade principle for popularity. It's what happened to Ethelred the Unready when he kept paying off the Vikings. Each compromise eroded a little more of his power until finally, there was nothing left. Contrast that with Vespasian, who understood that sometimes standing your ground is the only way to preserve your position. His reign wasn't without controversy, but in the end, he left behind a strong, stable empire, precisely because he wasn't afraid to be disliked in the moment. Lastly, there's Emperor Hadrian, a master of selective accommodation. Hadrian was smart enough to understand that not every battle needed to be fought. While some rulers gave everything to everyone, Hadrian chose his battles wisely. He didn't feel the need to win over every single person, nor did he exhaust his resources trying to maintain an impossible balance. Instead, he focused on the relationships and decisions that mattered most. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of demands coming at you, whether it's in your personal or professional life, and realized that you simply can't meet them all? The temptation is to try, isn't it? But the reality is, when you spread yourself too thin, you end up disappointing everyone, including yourself. Hadrian avoided this by focusing on what was essential. He knew where to give and where to hold back, and in doing so, he maintained his core authority. This is where modern leadership so often falters. We try to meet every expectation, to satisfy every demand, and in doing so, we lose the ability to focus on what's truly important. Hadrian's strategy was clear. Compromise when it makes sense, but never at the expense of your integrity or your larger goals. This kind of selective accommodation builds long-term respect and stability. The historical consequences of people-pleasing were devastating. Croesus lost his kingdom, Nero lost his life, and Ethelred lost everything twice over. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was a slow, inevitable decay caused by the continuous erosion of authority, respect, and power. These rulers didn't fail because they lacked intelligence or capability. They failed because they tried to win over everyone around them, to be loved rather than respected, to appease rather than lead. When you look at modern life, the same patterns appear. How many times have you felt the pressure to be liked, to avoid conflict, to keep giving even when you know it's hurting you? And how many times has that led to your own frustration, burnout, or even betrayal? The truth is, people-pleasing doesn't just drain your resources, it destroys your identity. Whether it's in your career, your personal relationships, or your family life, the principles remain the same. When you give away too much of yourself in an attempt to keep others happy, you lose the very things that make you strong. And just like those ancient rulers, the more you give without boundaries, the more you weaken your own position. But here's the thing. You don't have to repeat their mistakes. The antidote to people-pleasing is setting clear boundaries, maintaining personal principles, and understanding that respect is far more valuable than temporary approval. It's about building your kingdom on a foundation of strength and integrity, not on the shifting sands of others' expectations. Remember, even the mightiest empires fell when their leaders chose appeasement over strength. In your own life, the courage to sometimes say no, to stand firm, and to prioritize long-term respect over short-term approval is the only way to protect what you've built. Whether you're managing a team, a family, or even just your own personal goals, the lessons of history are clear. Pleasing everyone pleases no one. In the end, the price of being too nice is far greater than the discomfort of standing your ground. And while you may not be ruling an empire, your personal kingdom deserves the same kind of firm leadership that's built to last. In this video, we've seen how the price of being too nice has played out across ancient history, leading to the fall of kingdoms and empires. But these lessons aren't just for the history books. They're warnings we can use today. By avoiding the mistakes of people-pleasing rulers like Nero, Croesus, Ethelred, and Wang Mang, we can build stronger, more resilient lives and relationships. So next time you're tempted to give in or to go along just to keep the peace, remember the stories of these fallen rulers and choose strength over appeasement.